while dust may drift and empires fall.
You spend much of your life carrying weight that was never yours to lift. Not physical weight, but the quiet burden of opinions, reactions, expectations, and comparisons that settle into the mind without permission. Most people never stop to question this burden. They simply adjust their posture and continue forward, exhausted, unaware that the load can be set down. The first act of positive thinking is not optimism. It is clarity. It is the recognition that the mind has been allowed to wander into territories where it holds no authority. Other people's judgments, future outcomes, imagined slights, unspoken comparisons, these occupy attention, drain energy, and distort perception. The Stoic does not deny that these things exist. He simply refuses to let them govern him. When you begin to focus only on yourself, something uncomfortable happens. Silence appears. Without constant reference to others, without mental noise fueled by approval or resistance, the mind is left alone with itself. Many retreat at this point. They rush back to distraction, conversation, stimulation. But this moment is essential. It is the threshold where discipline begins. In that silence, you start to observe how reactive the mind has become. Thoughts arise automatically, pulling attention outward. A memory triggers regret. A possibility triggers anxiety. A comparison triggers dissatisfaction. None of these require your participation, yet you have been offering it freely. To think positively in the Stoic sense is to interrupt this habit, not with denial but with examination. You begin to notice that the mind improves when it is given a single responsibility. When attention is divided among countless external concerns, it weakens. When attention is narrowed to what is within reach, your judgments, your actions, your effort, it strengthens. This is not a motivational idea. It is a practical observation. The discipline to focus inward is built through restraint. You restrain the impulse to comment on everything. You restrain the urge to react immediately. You restrain the habit of mentally narrating every experience. These restraints create space. In that space, choice becomes possible. Choice is the foundation of self-mastery. Without it, you are carried by habit. With it, you begin to direct yourself. This direction does not require intensity. It requires consistency. Each time you choose not to engage with an unproductive thought, you reinforce control. Each time you redirect attention back to your conduct, you strengthen it. Positive thinking here is not the insistence that things will turn out well. It is the insistence that you will conduct yourself well regardless of how things turn out. This distinction matters. One depends on chance. The other depends on character. As you practice this, you notice how much emotional disturbance comes from resistance to reality. You argue with what has already happened. You resent what cannot be changed. You replay conversations, outcomes, and decisions as if repetition could alter them. Focusing on yourself ends this argument. It replaces it with a question, what is required of me now? This question simplifies life. It cuts through excess emotion and unnecessary analysis. It brings attention back to action. Action grounded in reason is calming. It reduces helplessness. It restores a sense of agency. You begin to experience a different relationship with difficulty. Instead of interpreting it as personal injustice or failure, you see it as a condition. Conditions are neutral. They require response, not complaint. This perspective preserves energy. Over time, your inner dialogue changes. It becomes quieter, more precise. Fewer accusations, fewer justifications, more observation, more decision. This shift does not happen suddenly. It emerges through repetition, through returning attention to yourself again and again. As this practice continues, the mind becomes less cluttered. You are no longer pulled in multiple directions at once. Focus deepens, thoughts slow, emotional reactions lose their sharpness. You begin to feel anchored. This anchoring is not indifference. You still care. But you care without attachment to outcome. You invest effort, not identity. This allows you to remain steady even when results disappoint. By focusing only on yourself, you reclaim responsibility. Not responsibility for everything, but responsibility for the only thing that can truly be governed, your response. This responsibility is not heavy, it is freeing. It draws a clear boundary between what demands your attention and what does not. And as you learn to respect that boundary, you realize something subtle but powerful. The world has not become quieter. You have. Once you recognize that quiet within yourself, you begin to understand how rarely it was present before. Most of your life was lived in reaction, even when you believed you were choosing. Reaction disguises itself as urgency. It convinces you that everything demands immediate attention, immediate emotion, immediate judgment. The Stoic learns to doubt this urgency. When you focus only on yourself, you begin to slow the moment between stimulus and response. This pause is not weakness, it is strength. In that pause, you regain authorship of your actions. Without it, you are merely responding to cues placed by others, by habit, by fear. With it, you decide. At first, this pause feels unnatural. The mind has been trained to move quickly, to comment, to react. Stillness can feel like neglect. But over time, you realize that most reactions were unnecessary. They solved nothing. They only added noise. Positive thinking, in this deeper sense, is the refusal to let the mind deteriorate into complaint. Complaint weakens judgment. It frames events as burdens rather than realities. When you remove complaint, situations lose their emotional excess. They become manageable. This does not mean you deny discomfort. You acknowledge it fully, but you do not dramatize it. You do not build identity around it. Pain is experienced, not narrated endlessly. This containment preserves clarity. As you continue focusing inward, you become aware of how often you sought validation to stabilize yourself. Approval once felt necessary to confirm worth. Disagreement felt threatening. This dependence created vulnerability. Any external shift could disturb you. The Stoic reorients worth inward, not through affirmation, but through conduct. You evaluate yourself based on effort, discipline, and integrity. This evaluation is quiet and private. It does not require witnesses. With this shift, comparison loses relevance. You stop measuring yourself against others' appearances, progress, or recognition. Their path does not inform yours. Comparison dissolves when direction is clear. You begin to experience a new kind of confidence, not the confidence of display, but the confidence of preparedness. You trust yourself to meet difficulty without collapse. This trust is built slowly through consistent self-command. Focusing only on yourself also reveals where discipline is lacking. You notice moments of avoidance. You notice rationalizations. Instead of condemning yourself, you observe these patterns. Observation is corrective when it is honest. You learn to replace harsh self-judgment with firm self-direction. Judgment paralyzes. Direction moves. You speak to yourself as one would guide something valuable, with seriousness, not cruelty. As this internal relationship improves, emotional volatility decreases. You recover faster from irritation. You do not cling to disappointment. You allow emotions to arise and pass without resistance or indulgence. This balance is not suppression. It is regulation. You also become more selective with attention. You stop feeding thoughts that weaken you. You do not entertain every narrative the mind produces. You choose which thoughts deserve continuation. This selection is the essence of mental discipline. Positive thinking here is not repetition of hopeful phrases. It is the consistent refusal to dwell on what degrades focus. You acknowledge difficulty, then move forward anyway. This movement builds resilience. With resilience, patience deepens. You stop demanding immediate change. You accept gradual progress. This patience removes pressure. It allows effort to be sustained. You notice that silence becomes more comfortable. You do not feel compelled to fill every gap with words or activity. Silence becomes restorative. It allows thought to settle and align. This alignment affects action. You act with less hesitation. Decisions become simpler because they are guided by principle rather than emotion. You ask fewer questions and take clearer steps. As your actions align with your values, regret diminishes. Even when outcomes are unfavorable, you know you acted correctly. This knowledge provides stability that success alone cannot offer. You also become aware of how much time was spent imagining futures that never arrived. Anxiety once lived in those imagined spaces. By focusing on what is present and within control, anxiety loses ground. This focus does not narrow life, it sharpens it. You become more attentive to what you are doing now, not what might happen later. This presence enriches experience. Over time, this approach changes how others perceive you. You appear calmer, more deliberate, not because you perform calmness, but because it has become habitual. Yet this perception is secondary. The true change is internal. You feel less scattered, less compelled, less reactive, more steady. You begin to understand that focusing only on yourself is not selfishness. It is responsibility. It is the recognition that you cannot govern the world, but you can govern your response to it. This governance is the foundation of freedom, and freedom, once tasted, reshapes everything that follows. As this freedom settles in, you start to notice how many of your past struggles were not caused by events themselves, but by the meanings you attach to them. The mind, left unchecked, assigns interpretation before understanding. It labels experiences as threats or failures before examining their substance. By focusing only on yourself, you interrupt this reflex. You begin to see thoughts as occurrences rather than commands. A thought appears, but it does not require obedience. This distinction changes everything. You are no longer fused with every idea that crosses your mind. You can observe without engaging, acknowledge without acting. This observation introduces calm. The mind stops racing to conclusions. It slows enough to assess. In this slower rhythm, judgment becomes more accurate. Emotional reactions soften because they are no longer fed by exaggerated narratives. Positive thinking here becomes disciplined thinking. You refuse to amplify negativity through repetition. You notice how often the mind revisits the same grievance, replaying it as if repetition adds value. It does not. It only deepens the groove. When you stop feeding it, it weakens. You also recognize how much suffering came from wanting reality to align with preference. Expectations once dictated emotional state. When events failed to meet them, frustration followed. By loosening attachment to expectation, you regain equilibrium. This does not mean you abandon standards. You maintain standards for yourself, not for outcomes. You commit to effort, not results. This commitment stabilizes motivation. You no longer oscillate between hope and disappointment. As you practice this, the sense of urgency that once governed your decisions fades. You stop rushing to secure certainty. You accept uncertainty as a condition of life, not a problem to be solved. This acceptance quiets the mind. You notice how often people seek control through force or insistence. You recognize this impulse in yourself as well, but focusing inward reveals a different approach. Control begins with restraint, with the ability to refrain from unnecessary action. Restraint creates space for wisdom. When you do not react immediately, you allow reason to surface. Reason does not shout. It requires silence to be heard. You begin to appreciate the value of measured response. You speak less, but with greater intention. You act less, impulsively, but more effectively. This economy of effort conserves energy. With conserved energy, focus deepens. You can sustain attention on a single task without fragmentation. This depth produces quality. Quality builds confidence rooted in competence, not comparison. You also become aware of the stories you tell yourself about identity. Once you defined yourself by roles, achievements, or recognition. These definitions were fragile. They shifted with circumstance. By focusing only on yourself, you redefine identity around character. Character is stable. It is expressed through choices made under pressure, through consistency when convenience tempts deviation. This internal measure is reliable. As this measure becomes clear, You experience fewer internal conflicts. Decisions align more easily because they are filtered through principle. You know what is acceptable and what is not. This clarity reduces hesitation. Emotional strength grows from this alignment. You are no longer torn between desire and duty. You choose duty, and desire gradually follows. This is not deprivation. It is order. Order brings calm. Calm allows reflection. Reflection refines judgment. This cycle reinforces itself. You also begin to see how much unnecessary drama once surrounded your thoughts. Minor setbacks felt catastrophic, small criticisms felt personal. By reframing events accurately, their emotional charge diminishes. You stop taking things personally that were never about you. You stop internalizing others' moods. You stop assuming intent where there is none. This detachment is not indifference. It is precision. Precision sharpens perception. You see situations more clearly. You respond appropriately rather than excessively. This appropriateness preserves dignity. As dignity becomes habitual, self-respect deepens. You trust yourself to behave well regardless of circumstance. This trust reduces fear. You are no longer afraid of pressure revealing weakness because you have trained yourself to meet it. This training does not eliminate emotion. It organizes it. Emotions are felt, understood, and released without domination. This balance keeps the mind functional. You notice that life feels less chaotic, not because circumstances have changed, but because your interpretation has matured. You no longer interpret difficulty as evidence of failure. You see it as part of the process. This perspective removes despair. It replaces it with persistence. You continue forward without needing reassurance. Over time, you begin to experience satisfaction not from achievement, but from coherence, from knowing that your thoughts, values, and actions are aligned. This coherence is deeply stabilizing. You are no longer scattered across possibilities. You are centered in responsibility. This center holds, and as it holds, you realize that focusing only on yourself was never a narrowing of life. It was the clearing of it. As this clearing continues, you begin to notice how the mind behaves when it is no longer crowded by unnecessary concern. There is a steadiness that replaces restlessness. You are not constantly reaching for reassurance or stimulation. You are present with what you are doing, and that presence has weight. You start to see how often distraction once masqueraded as relief. The impulse to escape uncomfortable thought, to fill silence, to delay effort. These habits were not harmless. They fractured attention and weakened resolve. By focusing only on yourself, you remove the need to escape. You face what is there directly. This directness strengthens you. When you no longer avoid discomfort, discomfort loses its authority. It becomes an experience, not a command. You feel it fully, then continue. This is not endurance for its own sake. It is the refusal to let discomfort dictate behavior. Positive thinking at this stage is grounded in acceptance. You accept the conditions of your life without resignation. Acceptance here does not mean approval. It means recognition. You stop arguing with reality and redirect energy toward response. This redirection simplifies decisions. Instead of asking why something happened, you ask what must be done. Instead of seeking blame, you seek adjustment. This practical orientation keeps the mind active rather than agitated. You also become more attentive to the quality of your effort. You notice when attention drifts, when work becomes mechanical. You correct gently, without frustration. This self-correction is a form of respect. You treat your attention as something valuable. Over time, this respect compounds. Focus improves. Tasks are completed more thoroughly. You experience fewer unfinished obligations weighing on the mind. Completion brings relief, not because of reward, but because of order restored. As order grows internally, you feel less compelled to control external situations. You realize that much of the urge to control came from inner disorder. When the mind is unsettled, it seeks stability by manipulating circumstances. When the mind is steady, it allows circumstances to unfold. This allowance does not weaken you. It makes you adaptable. You respond to change without resistance. You adjust plans without resentment. This flexibility preserves momentum. You also begin to understand that strength does not require constant assertion. You no longer feel the need to prove resilience through struggle or display. Strength is shown in consistency, not spectacle. Your relationship with time changes. You stop rushing toward future validation. You invest fully in the present task. This investment reduces impatience. You are less concerned with how long something takes and more concerned with how well it is done. This shift reduces anxiety. Anxiety feeds on imagined futures. Presence dissolves it. When attention is anchored in what is happening now, fear has little space to operate. You also notice how much emotional disturbance once came from unnecessary engagement, opinions offered where silence would suffice, arguments pursued without purpose. By choosing engagement selectively, you conserve emotional energy. This conservation allows deeper thinking. You reflect more clearly. You examine motives more honestly. You notice when pride attempts to disguise itself as principle. This honesty strengthens integrity. Integrity becomes a guiding force. You choose actions that align with your values even when inconvenient. This alignment builds self-respect. Self-respect stabilizes confidence. Confidence here is not optimism about outcomes. It is trust in conduct. You trust yourself to act well under pressure. This trust reduces fear of challenge. You begin to see how much fear once came from uncertainty about your own response. Now that response is more predictable, you know how you will behave. This predictability is grounding. With this grounding, emotional reactions lose their volatility. Anger becomes brief and contained. Disappointment becomes informative rather than consuming. Joy becomes calm rather than intoxicating. You also grow more patient with others. You recognize their behavior as a reflection of their own internal state, not a commentary on you. This recognition prevents unnecessary offense. Patience does not mean tolerance of all behavior. It means clarity without agitation. You set boundaries calmly. You enforce them without hostility. This firmness is effective because it is not emotional. As you continue focusing inward, you become more aware of subtle progress. You recover from setbacks faster. You dwell less on mistakes. You correct course without self-reproach. This efficiency is not harshness. It is practicality. You understand that energy spent on regret is energy not spent on improvement. You also notice that your inner dialogue has become quieter. There is less commentary, fewer imagined conversation. The mind speaks when necessary, then rests. This rest is restorative. Rest allows insight. Ideas surface naturally. Decisions clarify without force. You trust this process because it has proven reliable. You are no longer seeking certainty in everything. You accept ambiguity where it exists. You act with the information available. This acceptance reduces hesitation. As this way of moving through life solidifies, you begin to recognize that focusing only on yourself has created a stable center. From this center, you can engage with the world without being absorbed by it. You are not withdrawn. You are grounded, and grounding, once established, supports everything built upon it. With this grounding established, effort begins to feel different. It is no longer something you force through will alone. It becomes a natural expression of order. You act because action is appropriate, not because emotion pushes you or fear compels you. This distinction matters. Action driven by fear is unstable. Action guided by principle endures. You notice how often motivation once depended on external conditions. Praise energized you. Criticism drained you. Progress felt dependent on recognition. By focusing only on yourself, motivation becomes internal. You act because the action aligns with who you intend to be, not because someone is watching. This internal motivation is quieter, but it is far more reliable. It does not surge and collapse. It remains steady. even when circumstances are unremarkable. You continue working when there is no applause, no urgency, no visible reward. This is where discipline proves its value. You begin to understand that most people are not defeated by difficulty but by inconsistency. They act intensely for short periods, then withdraw. You move differently now. You choose sustainability over intensity. You value repetition over excitement. This approach changes how you experience challenge. You no longer interpret difficulty as resistance from life. You see it as a signal that effort is required. Nothing more, nothing less. This interpretation removes emotional excess. Positive thinking here is accuracy. You assess situations without distortion. You neither minimize nor exaggerate. You see what is required and commit to it. This clarity preserves energy. As this becomes habitual, you notice fewer internal negotiations. You no longer bargain with yourself to avoid effort. You decide once, then act. This decisiveness simplifies the mind. You also notice how much self-respect grows from follow-through. Each completed obligation reinforces trust in yourself. You begin to rely on your own word. This reliability is stabilizing. With reliability comes confidence that is not performative. You do not need to project strength. You carry it. Others may sense it, but it is not cultivated for display. It exists regardless of observation. You become less reactive to others' behavior. Their impatience does not infect you. Their urgency does not rush you. Their doubt does not unsettle you. This composure is not indifference. It is independence. Independence allows you to listen more carefully. You no longer prepare responses while others speak. You are present. This presence improves understanding. It also improves restraint. You respond only when response adds value. Silence becomes more deliberate. You speak when necessary, not to fill space. This selectivity gives words weight. When you do speak, you are heard. As your internal order strengthens, you become more aware of subtle distractions, small habits that fragment attention, minor indulgences that erode discipline. You address them without drama. You adjust quietly. These adjustments compound. Focus sharpens. Time is used more deliberately. You waste less energy on regret or anticipation. You are engaged where you are. You also begin to notice a shift in emotional endurance. You tolerate discomfort without seeking escape. Boredom no longer threatens you. You remain present through it. This endurance expands capacity. Capacity allows you to carry responsibility without strain. You take on what is yours and release what is not. This boundary prevents overload. You become more precise in evaluating progress. You no longer seek dramatic transformation as proof. You look for consistency. You measure improvement by reliability, not novelty. This precision prevents discouragement. You recognize progress even when it is subtle. You stay committed without needing constant affirmation. As this continues, you begin to experience a deeper calm. Not the calm of inactivity, but the calm of alignment. Your thoughts, intentions, and actions move in the same direction. This alignment reduces internal friction. Reduced friction conserves energy. You have more attention available for meaningful work. You are less drained by minor frustrations. You also grow more tolerant of delay. You do not rush outcomes. You trust the process because you are committed to it. This trust reduces impatience. Impatience once pushed you into premature decisions. Now you wait until clarity arrives. This waiting is active, not passive. You prepare while you wait. Preparation replaces worry. Instead of imagining failure, you strengthen capacity. This shift is subtle but decisive. You also notice that emotional reactions no longer linger. Irritation passes quickly. Disappointment informs rather than consumes. You return to equilibrium faster. This recovery is a sign of resilience. Not the resilience of toughness, but the resilience of regulation. You absorb impact without losing form. As days accumulate, this way of operating becomes familiar. You no longer need to remind yourself constantly. Discipline is embedded. Focus is habitual. You begin to understand that focusing only on yourself has reduced noise without reducing engagement. You are fully involved, but not entangled. This distinction preserves clarity. And clarity, once established, becomes the lens through which everything else is seen. As clarity becomes habitual, you begin to notice a refinement in how you experience pressure. What once felt overwhelming now feels instructive. Pressure reveals structure. It exposes weak habits, imprecise thinking, and emotional shortcuts. Instead of resisting this exposure, you use it. You treat pressure as information. This change alters your relationship with difficulty. You no longer see it as interruption, but as part of the design. Something to be worked through, not complained about. When resistance appears, you do not dramatize it. You identify its source and address it directly. You become more attentive to cause and effect within yourself. When focus slips, you examine why. When discipline weakens, you trace it back to a decision, not a flaw. This approach keeps responsibility intact without turning it into self-attack. Positive thinking here is not emotional elevation. It is steadiness of interpretation. You refuse to inflate setbacks into conclusions. A difficult day does not become a difficult life. A mistake does not become identity. You correct and continue. This refusal to generalize preserves momentum. Many abandon progress not because of failure, but because they interpret failure as verdict. You do not. You treat it as adjustment. You also become more precise in how you allocate energy. You stop over-investing emotionally in matters that do not improve character. You disengage from unnecessary tension. This disengagement is not avoidance. It is prioritization. As a result, you have more energy available for what matters. You bring greater presence to work, to reflection, to rest. Each is done deliberately. None bleed into the other. You notice that rest improves when effort is honest. There is no lingering guilt when you pause, because you know you have acted well. Rest becomes restoration, not escape. This restoration supports consistency. You return to effort without resistance. You are not depleted by cycles of overexertion and collapse. You move at a sustainable pace. You also become more aware of subtle emotional cues. Early signs of irritation, fatigue, or distraction no longer go unnoticed. You respond before they escalate. This early response preserves balance. This awareness extends to thought patterns. You notice when the mind begins to speculate unnecessarily. You redirect it to what is tangible. This redirection keeps thinking productive. Productive thinking does not seek certainty. It seeks clarity sufficient for action. You no longer wait for perfect understanding before moving. You act with what you have, then adjust. This adaptability reduces hesitation. You trust yourself to correct course if needed. This trust encourages action. As you act more consistently, self-respect deepens. You become someone you can rely on. This reliability is quiet but powerful. It removes internal doubt. With doubt reduced, emotional noise subsides. You are not constantly evaluating yourself. You are engaged in doing what is required. This engagement stabilizes identity. You no longer define yourself by outcomes. You define yourself by adherence to principle. Outcomes fluctuate. Principles endure. This endurance creates a calm confidence. You do not need to assert it. It shows in restraint, in patience, in consistency. You also notice how less reactive you are to uncertainty. The future remains unknown, but it no longer dominates attention. You prepare without obsessing. You plan without clinging. This detachment does not weaken commitment. It strengthens it. You are committed to effort, not outcome. This keeps motivation intact. As this approach continues, you become more selective with concern. You ask whether something truly deserves attention. Many things do not. Letting them pass is not neglect. It is discernment. Discernment sharpens judgment. You invest where effort produces growth. You withdraw where it does not. This efficiency preserves energy. You also grow more comfortable with incompleteness. Not everything needs resolution immediately. You allow questions to remain open. This patience reduces mental strain. Over time, the mind becomes less crowded. There are fewer unfinished conversations, fewer imagined disputes. Silence increases. This silence is not emptiness. It is readiness. In silence, you respond appropriately when response is needed. As this readiness stabilizes, you begin to see how far you have moved from reactivity. Situations that once provoked strong emotion now register as neutral. This neutrality is not indifference. It is control. Control here is not domination. It is governance. You govern your attention, your interpretation, your action. This governance is the essence of self-mastery. You understand now that focusing only on yourself was never about withdrawal. It was about consolidation, bringing scattered parts of the mind into order. This order supports everything that follows. It allows you to meet challenge without distortion, to experience success without intoxication, to endure difficulty without collapse. And as this way of moving through life becomes familiar, you sense a quiet confidence forming beneath everything else. Not excitement, not pride, just readiness. Readiness to continue. With that readiness established, you begin to notice how little effort it now takes to remain composed in situations that once unsettled you. This is not because the situations have softened. It is because your internal structure has strengthened. When the foundation is sound, external pressure distributes itself rather than collapsing the whole. You are no longer surprised by difficulty. You expect it without resentment. Expectation removes shock, and shock is what destabilizes most people. When adversity arrives, it does not feel personal. It feels procedural, something to be handled, not endured dramatically. This perspective changes how you experience emotion. Feelings still arise, but they no longer dictate behavior. You feel irritation without becoming irritable. You feel disappointment without withdrawing. You feel uncertainty without panic. Emotion becomes information, not instruction. Positive thinking here becomes disciplined neutrality. You do not rush to comfort yourself with false reassurance, nor do you indulge pessimism. You allow events to be what they are while maintaining your internal order. This balance preserves clarity. You also become more attentive to the language you use internally. Exaggerated thoughts lose their appeal. Words like always, never, ruined, impossible quietly disappear. They no longer describe reality accurately, and accuracy has become more important than emotional expression. Accuracy strengthens judgment. Judgment guides action. This chain keeps you effective even under strain. You do not need to feel confident to act confidently. You act because action is required. As this continues, you recognize how much of your earlier fatigue came from mental excess. Overthinking, overreacting, over-explaining. Each added weight to decisions that required none. By simplifying interpretation, you simplify action. You also notice a growing patience with processes that unfold slowly. You stop demanding visible progress as proof that effort matters. You understand that much of what is valuable develops beneath the surface. Character, discipline, and resilience do not announce themselves. This understanding removes impatience. You are no longer in conflict with time. You work steadily and allow results to arrive when they do. This steadiness reduces frustration. You also become more discerning about where you place attention. You recognize that attention is finite. Once wasted, it cannot be recovered. You guard it carefully, not rigidly, but deliberately. This guarding does not isolate you. It refines interaction. You engage fully when you choose to engage. You withdraw cleanly when engagement offers no value. This selectivity preserves energy. You begin to notice how much influence mood once had over your decisions. You acted when you felt like it and delayed when you did not. Now mood is secondary. Commitment leads, feeling follows. This reversal strengthens reliability. Reliability reshapes identity. You see yourself as someone who follows through, This self-image reinforces behavior. You become consistent because you expect consistency from yourself. You also experience fewer internal arguments. The mind no longer negotiates endlessly. Decisions are made, then executed. This decisiveness reduces mental friction. With reduced friction, thinking becomes clearer. You reflect without rumination. You review without self-accusation. You extract lessons without attaching emotion unnecessarily. This efficiency accelerates growth. You also become less reactive to others' uncertainty. Their doubt does not infect you. Their urgency does not rush you. Their frustration does not provoke you. You remain anchored. This anchoring allows you to offer stability without effort, not through advice or reassurance, but through presence. Calm presence has influence without force. You also grow more comfortable with silence in conversation. You no longer feel compelled to fill pauses. Silence becomes space for understanding. This restraint improves communication. As your inner discipline deepens, you notice fewer regrets at the end of the day. You may not have accomplished everything, but you acted according to intention. This alignment brings rest. Rest, in turn, supports clarity. You wake without lingering tension. You approach the day without resistance. This continuity strengthens momentum. You begin to understand that strength is not built in moments of intensity, but in ordinary decisions repeated consistently. Each time you choose focus over distraction. Each time you choose restraint over impulse. Each time you choose responsibility over excuse. These choices accumulate quietly. There is no sudden transformation. There is steady refinement. You no longer seek to control how you are perceived. You allow conduct to speak. This release removes a significant burden. You are not performing, you are functioning. Functioning well becomes its own reward. You experience satisfaction without celebration, progress without noise. This understated progress is durable. You also notice that setbacks no longer trigger identity crises. A mistake is a mistake, not a verdict. You correct it without drama. This calm response preserves confidence. Confidence now rests on evidence. You have faced difficulty without collapse. You have remained focused under distraction. You have maintained discipline without external pressure. These experiences accumulate into certainty. This certainty is quiet. It does not demand expression. It supports you internally. As this way of being stabilizes, you recognize that focusing only on yourself has refined your relationship with the world. You are engaged, but not entangled. Present, but not absorbed. Committed, but not attached. And from this position, you are prepared to continue forward with a steadiness that does not depend on circumstances, only on character. From that steadiness, a subtler responsibility emerges. You begin to recognize that discipline is not only about restraint, but about direction. Holding yourself together is necessary, but insufficient. You must also decide where you are going and why. Without purpose, even strong discipline becomes mechanical. You start examining your intentions more carefully. Not the outcomes you desire, but the reasons behind your actions. This examination is not moralizing. It is clarifying. You ask whether your efforts are aligned with your values or merely reactions to pressure. This distinction matters. As you refine this alignment, you notice that certain ambitions quietly lose their grip. Goals driven by comparison or validation no longer feel compelling. They require too much attention outward and offer too little stability inward. You let them go without regret. What replaces them is quieter but more durable, a commitment to conduct, a standard for how you respond, how you work, how you endure. These standards do not fluctuate with success or failure. They remain fixed, which gives you freedom. Freedom here does not mean ease. It means clarity. You know what is expected of you because you have decided it yourself. This removes confusion. Confusion is exhausting. Clarity conserves energy. You also begin to see challenges as opportunities to practice rather than obstacles to avoid. Each difficulty becomes a test of internal order. Not a test you fear, but one you accept. Acceptance changes posture. You stand upright rather than brace defensively. This posture affects how you enter demanding situations. You arrive prepared rather than anxious. You do not anticipate victory or defeat. You anticipate effort. Effort is within your control. Control becomes the central principle, not control over events, but over response. You stop asking whether something is fair or deserved. Those questions lead nowhere productive. Instead, you ask what is required now. This question simplifies complexity. It directs attention to the present moment. The present moment is manageable. The future, imagined excessively, is not. By returning repeatedly to what is required now, you reduce procrastination. Delay often comes from resisting imagined discomfort. When you focus on the immediate step, resistance weakens. You also notice an improvement in judgment under pressure. Because you are not emotionally invested in appearances, you can choose the appropriate response rather than the impressive one. This practicality increases effectiveness. Effectiveness reinforces confidence, not bravado, but trust in your ability to navigate uncertainty. You trust yourself because you have evidence of composure under strain. This trust changes how you relate to risk. You no longer avoid difficulty to preserve comfort. You accept difficulty as a condition of growth. This acceptance removes fear's leverage. You also become more honest with yourself about limitations. You stop pretending capacity where it does not exist. This honesty is not self-diminishing. It is strategic. You allocate effort realistically. Realism prevents burnout. You pace yourself. You understand that endurance requires sustainability. This long view supports resilience. As you adopt this long view, impatience with others diminishes. You recognize that development unfolds unevenly. You allow others their process without interference. This restraint preserves relationships. You also release the urge to correct or instruct unnecessarily. You understand that example teaches more reliably than explanation. You focus on your conduct and let it stand. This restraint strengthens credibility. When you do speak, words carry weight because they are rare and measured. You no longer speak to be noticed. You speak when clarity is required. Silence becomes a deliberate tool rather than an absence. In silence you observe. Observation sharpens understanding. You notice patterns you once missed. You begin to see how often people act against their own interests out of impatience or fear. This observation reinforces your commitment to discipline. You see clearly what disorder produces. This clarity does not harden you, it steadies you. You feel compassion without absorption. You understand struggle without internalizing it. Your emotional range remains intact, but it is regulated. You experience satisfaction without attachment. You experience disappointment without collapse. This regulation preserves continuity. Continuity is now central to your identity. You value showing up consistently more than occasional intensity. You measure progress by adherence to principle, not by fluctuation in results. This measurement changes how you evaluate days. A good day is one where you acted with intention, regardless of outcome. A difficult day is still a success if discipline was maintained. This reframing protects morale. Morale grounded in conduct does not fluctuate wildly. It remains stable. You also notice an increased tolerance for solitude, not isolation, but the ability to be alone with your thoughts without discomfort. This solitude strengthens independence. Independence reduces susceptibility to influence. You are less reactive to trends, opinions, and emotional currents. You decide deliberately. Deliberation slows impulse. Slowed impulse improves choice. Improved choice builds a life that feels ordered rather than accidental. As this order settles, you recognize that positive thinking, properly understood, is not optimism about outcomes. It is confidence in your capacity to respond well, regardless of outcome. And with that understanding, you continue forward, not seeking ease, not seeking recognition, but maintaining the quiet work of becoming someone reliable under all conditions. From that reliability, a deeper calm begins to take hold, not a calm that depends on circumstances, but one that comes from repetition. You have seen yourself remain steady often enough that uncertainty no longer feels threatening, it feels familiar. Familiarity reduces fear. You begin to notice how much of life is noise. Opinions, reactions, urgency that serves no real purpose. This noise once pulled at you, demanded attention, shaped your mood. Now it passes by with less friction. You hear it without absorbing it. This is not withdrawal, it is selectivity. You choose what deserves your energy. Energy, once scattered, is now treated as something finite and valuable. You protect it. Protection requires boundaries. You learn to say no without hostility and yes without overcommitment. You no longer agree to things out of guilt or fear of disapproval. You decide based on capacity and principle. This decision-making is not dramatic. It is quiet and consistent. Over time, others notice a change. Not necessarily in words, but in presence. You are less reactive, less hurried. This steadiness alters how people interact with you. Some are drawn to it. Others feel unsettled by it. You do not adjust to either reaction. You remain aligned with your own standards. External response is not your responsibility. You also notice that internal dialogue has softened. The voice that once criticized or rushed you now speaks more clearly and less often. When it does speak, it offers correction without cruelty. This internal environment matters. A hostile inner voice undermines resilience. A disciplined but fair inner voice strengthens it. You have cultivated the latter through patience. Patience, you realize, is not passive waiting. It is active endurance. It is the willingness to remain engaged without forcing resolution. This endurance builds depth. Depth allows you to handle complexity without becoming overwhelmed. You can hold multiple truths without needing immediate certainty. This tolerance for ambiguity is a form of strength. As strength develops, you become less interested in proving anything. Proving requires an audience. Growth does not. Growth requires attention inward and effort applied consistently. You reflect more often on responsibility. Not as burden, but as ownership. You own your reactions, your habits, your direction. This ownership gives you leverage over your life. Leverage changes how you approach setbacks. When something fails, you do not search for blame. You search for adjustment. This practical response accelerates recovery. Recovery is quicker because you do not dramatize disruption. You see it as part of the process. Processes include friction. Expecting otherwise is unrealistic. This realism protects optimism. Your positive outlook is grounded, not naive. You expect difficulty and remain confident in your ability to meet it. This balance keeps you moving forward. Forward movement is measured, not rushed. You understand that meaningful change accumulates slowly. You resist shortcuts. Shortcuts often compromise foundation. Foundation matters more now than speed. You are building something internal that must endure pressure. Endurance requires structure. Structure shows up in routines, but also in thinking. You organize your priorities. You revisit them regularly. You remove what no longer serves. Removal is as important as addition. By subtracting distractions, you increase focus. Focus improves quality of effort. Quality replaces quantity as your metric. You would rather do fewer things well than many things poorly. This preference reduces stress. Reduced stress frees mental space. In that space, reflection deepens. You think less about what others are doing and more about what you are becoming. Becoming is ongoing. You do not imagine an endpoint where discipline is complete. You understand that maintenance is part of mastery. This understanding keeps ego in check. You do not see yourself as finished or superior. You see yourself as responsible for daily upkeep. Daily upkeep is unremarkable. It involves attention, restraint, and follow-through. These acts rarely attract notice. That no longer concerns you. Concern has shifted inward. You care whether you acted with integrity, whether you honored your commitments, whether you remained composed under pressure. These questions guide your evaluation. They are simple but demanding. They do not allow excuses. Excuses lose appeal when you accept full responsibility. You recognize that excuses protect comfort at the expense of growth. You choose growth. Choosing growth repeatedly shapes identity. Identity formed this way is resilient. It does not fracture under criticism or uncertainty. As this identity stabilizes, you feel less need to defend yourself. Defense implies threat. You do not feel threatened by disagreement or misunderstanding. You allow others their interpretations. You remain grounded in your own conduct. This detachment is not indifference. It is confidence without arrogance. Confidence expressed quietly endures longer. It does not require reinforcement. It rests on consistency. And so, as you move forward, you do so with a settled mind and a clear sense of responsibility, continuing the work without announcement, without urgency, focused inward, prepared for what comes next. From that reliability, a deeper calm begins to take hold. Not a calm that depends on circumstances, but one that comes from repetition. You have seen yourself remain steady, often enough that uncertainty no longer feels threatening, it feels familiar. Familiarity reduces fear. You begin to notice how much of life is noise, opinions, reactions, urgency that serves no real purpose. This noise once pulled at you, demanded attention, shaped your mood. Now it passes by with less friction. You hear it without absorbing it. This is not withdrawal. It is selectivity. You choose what deserves your energy. Energy once scattered is now treated as something finite and valuable. You protect it. Protection requires boundaries. You learn to say no without hostility and yes without overcommitment. You no longer agree to things out of guilt or fear of disapproval. You decide based on capacity and principle. This decision-making is not dramatic. It is quiet and consistent. Over time, others notice a change, not necessarily in words, but in presence. You are less reactive, less hurried. This steadiness alters how people interact with you. Some are drawn to it. Others feel unsettled by it. You do not adjust to either reaction. You remain aligned with your own standards. External response is not your responsibility. You also notice that internal dialogue has softened. The voice that once criticized or rushed you now speaks more clearly and less often. When it does speak, it offers correction without cruelty. This internal environment matters. A hostile inner voice undermines resilience. A disciplined but fair inner voice strengthens it. You have cultivated the latter through patience. Patience, you realize, is not passive waiting. It is active endurance. It is the willingness to remain engaged without forcing resolution. This endurance builds depth. Depth allows you to handle complexity without becoming overwhelmed. You can hold multiple truths without needing immediate certainty. This tolerance for ambiguity is a form of strength. As strength develops, you become less interested in proving anything. Proving requires an audience. Growth does not. Growth requires attention inward and effort applied consistently. You reflect more often on responsibility, not as burden, but as ownership. You own your reactions, your habits, your direction. This ownership gives you leverage over your life. Leverage changes how you approach setbacks. When something fails, you do not search for blame. You search for adjustment. This practical response accelerates recovery. Recovery is quicker because you do not dramatize disruption. You see it as part of the process. Processes include friction. Expecting otherwise is unrealistic. This realism protects optimism. Your positive outlook is grounded, not naive. You expect difficulty and remain confident in your ability to meet it. This balance keeps you moving forward. Forward movement is measured, not rushed. You understand that meaningful change accumulates slowly. You resist shortcuts. Shortcuts often compromise foundation. Foundation matters more now than speed. You are building something internal that must endure pressure. Endurance requires structure. Structure shows up in routines but also in thinking. You organize your priorities. You revisit them regularly. You remove what no longer serves. Removal is as important as addition. By subtracting distractions, You increase focus. Focus improves quality of effort. Quality replaces quantity as your metric. You would rather do fewer things well than many things poorly. This preference reduces stress. Reduced stress frees mental space. In that space, reflection deepens. You think less about what others are doing and more about what you are becoming. Becoming is ongoing. You do not imagine an endpoint where discipline is complete. You understand that maintenance is part of mastery. This understanding keeps ego in check. You do not see yourself as finished or superior. You see yourself as responsible for daily upkeep. Daily upkeep is unremarkable. It involves attention, restraint, and follow-through. These acts rarely attract notice. That no longer concerns you. Concern has shifted inward. You care whether you acted with integrity, whether you honored your commitments, whether you remained composed under pressure. These questions guide your evaluation. They are simple but demanding. They do not allow excuses. Excuses lose appeal when you accept full responsibility. You recognize that excuses protect comfort at the expense of growth. You choose growth. Choosing growth repeatedly shapes identity. Identity formed this way is resilient. It does not fracture under criticism or uncertainty. As this identity stabilizes, you feel less need to defend yourself. Defense implies threat. You do not feel threatened by disagreement or misunderstanding. You allow others their interpretations. You remain grounded in your own conduct. This detachment is not indifference. It is confidence without arrogance. Confidence expressed quietly endures longer. It does not require reinforcement. It rests on consistency. And so, as you move forward, you do so with a settled mind and a clear sense of responsibility, continuing the work without announcement, without urgency, focused inward, prepared for what comes next. Part 10 by now. The pattern is clear to you, even if you rarely name it. A life shaped from the inside does not announce itself. It reveals itself slowly, through steadiness. What once felt like effort now feels like orientation. You are not forcing discipline anymore. You are returning to it again and again, as one returns to a familiar path. This return is important. You understand that the mind drifts naturally. Attention scatters. Old habits attempt to resurface. None of this surprises you. Surprise belongs to those who expect permanence from temporary states. You no longer do. Instead, you meet each day with measured intent. Not enthusiasm, not dread, just clarity. You ask what is required of you, not what would be most comfortable. You act accordingly. This alignment reduces internal conflict. When actions and values agree, the mind settles. Settling does not mean stagnation. On the contrary, it creates room for refinement. You notice subtleties now. The small moments where impatience appears, the slight urge to compare, the temptation to speak when silence would serve better. Awareness catches these impulses early, before they become behavior. This early awareness is the fruit of long attention. It allows choice where there was once reaction. Choice restores dignity. You are no longer pulled by every stimulus. You respond deliberately, even when the response is restraint. Restraint is often misunderstood. It is not denial for its own sake. It is selection. You choose what to engage with, what to ignore, what to delay. This choice protects your direction. Direction matters more to you than validation. You have learned that approval is unstable currency. It fluctuates, disappears, and often demands compromise. You would rather move slowly in alignment than quickly in pursuit of recognition. This preference reshapes ambition. You still work, you still strive, but the striving is cleaner. It is not fueled by insecurity or comparison. It is fueled by responsibility to your own potential. Potential you now see is not abstract. It is expressed through habits honored over time, through promises kept when no one is watching, through restraint exercised when indulgence is available. These quiet victories accumulate. They do not produce exhilaration, they produce reliability. And reliability produces trust, not just from others, but from yourself. Self-trust changes everything. When you trust yourself, decisions become simpler. You do not overanalyze every step. You know that even if you misstep, you will correct course without panic. Panic fades when you accept impermanence. You accept that conditions change, people change, outcomes shift. What remains is your character. That is what you carry forward. Carrying character forward gives continuity to your life. Events differ, but the way you meet them is consistent. This consistency is grounding. It anchors you when circumstances are unstable. You also recognize limits more clearly. You do not promise what you cannot deliver. You do not stretch yourself thin to meet imagined expectations. You respect capacity. Respecting capacity sustains effort. Sustained effort is more powerful than bursts of intensity. You have seen intensity fade. You have seen discipline endure. Endurance wins quietly. Quietly, your priorities simplify. You care less about being seen as successful and more about being solid. Solid people endure pressure without distortion. Distortion comes from wanting too much too fast. You resist that impulse now. You are willing to wait. Waiting is easier when you are occupied with meaningful work. Meaning emerges from contribution aligned with values. You do not need grand purpose statements. You need honest work done well. As this understanding settles, your mind grows less cluttered. Fewer regrets, fewer projections, fewer rehearsed arguments. Presence replaces anticipation. Presence sharpens perception. You notice more, react less. You listen without preparing a response. You act without narrating your actions internally. This simplicity is not accidental. It is cultivated. It is maintained. And it must be protected. You know now that focusing only on yourself does not mean isolation. It means responsibility. It means tending to what you control so that you do not burden others with your disorder. Thinking positively in this sense is not denial. It is orientation toward constructive response. It is choosing clarity over complaint, effort over resentment. This orientation does not promise ease. It promises coherence. A life that makes sense to the one living it. And so you continue, not chasing transformation, but practicing steadiness, not demanding outcomes, but honoring process. Each day, you return to attention, discipline, and restraint. If this way of thinking resonates with you, carry it forward deliberately. Reflect on it. Test it in your own conduct. Let it shape you quietly over time. And if you wish to continue building this inner structure with patience and seriousness, remain here, where the work is slow, deliberate, and built by Stoicism.